Hey there, this is Dan. You're watching the Salty Sea, and the rules have just dropped for the Gladitorium, which is what they're calling the team that is going to be in the Warhammer Heroes boxes for Stormcast Eternals. This is your guide to that box. Many thanks to the anonymous, well, I will keep them anonymous leaker. They didn't leak it anonymously, but they should have, and we love them for their wonderful leaking skills. Now, let's get into it. The first one is Numara Falconis. She is a Ranger Shooty Prime. Listen, every Stormcast name is terrible. Vigilor. She is a Vigilor Prime. And by the numbers, it's tough to sugarcoat things with Vigilors. They are a little expensive for what they do already. And so all of these fighters are going to be the profile plus 5 points of whatever they're copying. And so she's kind of in a tough spot that way. She does get access to the Vigilor Prime ability, which so you can attack once, use a triple, get +1 attack on the second attack to it. It's not the worst. I think it has some interesting applications in Kradron Overlords. One of my patrons found that. Shouts to you, Darren. So there's some cool stuff you can do with Vigilor Primes, but it's not a very good fighter on its own. The ability is kind of interesting. It is what it is. So +1 strength or +1 crit pulse in 6 inches. So a pulse is better than a bubble. So for example, you pick a number of friendly fighters equal to half the value of this ability, rounded up, and you give them either +1 strength or +1 crit on their next attack. That's nice because if Numara dies, they still get the benefit, right? That's kind of cool. That's better than bubbles. But Numara in general isn't going to be that close to the fight, hopefully at least. And so a 6-inch pulse, I think when you really want this, I think by then you'll often find that your allies have kind of outpaced you. You might only have 1 or 2 friendly fighters that you can even target with this. And +1 strength and +1 crit, we have plenty of abilities in the game that grant that. They don't grant you the choice, but they do grant both of those things, and none of those abilities are playable in any way. We even have doubles that grant +1 strength, and nobody plays them, right? So I think that Numara's in a tough spot, but that's okay. I actually wish I hadn't started with her, because some of these are pretty solid. Goltan the Relentless is interesting. Anti-primes with shields are totally fine. Solid fighter. They did get nerfed, but the nerf, it took them out of competitive play, but it didn't make them bad. You can totally ally an anti-prime into whatever you want, and even then they're not like bad in competitive play. It's just that there's better fighters. So 5 points more on an anti-prime is fine. That toughness 7 is actually kind of relevant in the meta in a lot of situations. Like there's just a lot of strength 6 fighters who are built on being able to dominate combat everywhere, and an anti-prime can kind of just weather that storm, which is kind of nice. So Goltan is totally fine on the numbers. The ability is kind of interesting. Each other friendly fighter within 6 gets to make a bonus move or attack. So it's a little bit like Calthea Zandire's ability, or at least it wants you to compare it to Coordinated Strike. But it's pretty different. It's really hard to set this up in a big way. For example, because they have to have taken damage. Sorry, I should have mentioned that right at the beginning. They have to take damage. Damage points allocated them, but it doesn't matter how many damage points, even 1 counts. It's kind of tough. The Lord Terminos is a Ruination Chamber guy with a similar stipulation on a similarly busted sounding ability, and I've actually found him pretty tough to use, and I've just found that a regular Ruinator, they're not called Ruinators, Stormcast names are terrible, but a regular Stormcast bro with the just +1 attack costs the exact same points and is better than the Lord Terminos. Goltan's kind of suffering from that. It's going to be really hard to set this up in a really big way, but the profile is totally solid. So you can play him and have some fun with him. And the 1 game out of 5 that you get this ability off, it's going to feel so cool. So you should feel fine about Goltan. Just don't play him thinking that you're going to just destroy everyone with the ability, because that's not happening, right? I want you to temper your expectations. You're going to play Goltan, just be happy that you have this holding piece that nobody can kill. And then every once in a blue moon, you're going to do something legendary with the ability. And that's a totally fine place to be. Let's get into Tenya. Tenya might be my favorite of the whole bunch. Praetor primes combo with the Stormcast Eternals battle trait, and they do it in kind of a nice way. So you get to just drop down, just like Scions of the Storm in AOS, right? You get to drop down 5 inches away from enemies with the Stormcast battle trait now, and a Praetor Prime has 6-inch threat range, so you don't have to use dice to get an attack in, because normally you have to be outside of 5, so someone who moves 4 hits for 1 inch, or moves 3 hits for 2 inches, they actually can't do it, right? Because they're exactly 5 threat range. You have to be outside of 5, so you're 1 like micro dot outside of range. That makes it kind of illegal to attack with most things, but Praetor Primes can do it without using dice, which means you can spend the dice on Onslaught if you want, or you can spend the dice elsewhere on the battlefield. I think that's the real trick, right? And so that makes Praetor Primes a lot better than they used to be. No one's playing them, but I really think they could, and only paying 5 more points is totally fine. The ability here is kind of interesting. You can pick a friendly fighter with it has to be visible, but that's fine, with the Thunderstrike rune mark within 6 inches of this fighter. Till the end of the battle round, add 2 to the move characteristic, 2 to toughness, and 2 to attack. That is a ridiculous amount of stuff. For it to actually be good, you do need a few things to play out, right? So if you are just getting just 1 regular +2 attack in, there's not really a lot of fighters where that's really going to be worth it. Even an Annihilator Prime +2 attacks, 3-5, you're probably hitting on 3s. That's decent, but even if you get 6 damage out of it, that's not really worth a triple. So you need it to be doing something where you have a fighter who is going to move and attack and be in a position where maybe they would have been vulnerable before and now they're not. That's kind of asking a lot for it to be really good, but it's kind of tough because this ability is clearly too impactful to be a double, and yet it kind of sits in that space where it's not quite impactful enough to be a triple. It's interesting. Listen, low impact triples are okay if you're not paying too many points for them, and in Stormcast as an ally, this guy gets to use the battle trait. Now, the ability is faction locked, so you kind of have to have him just with maybe another Thunderstrike fighter. You could run him and an Annihilator Prime in a Ruination Chamber warband, still have the battle trait for both of them. The Annihilator Prime gets to get the +2 move from Tenya. This is actually sounding pretty good now. Then you get to have Griff Crows, so you can still have these 2 super expensive fighters and have a reasonable number of activations. You can do stuff with Tenya, is all I'm saying. Tenya can give you real flexibility and real interesting things to do. Just make sure that you're not just using him as Onslaught. This ability is really bad if you just use it as a bad Brugit or something like that. You really want to be using every part of this ability. You want to be moving and attacking and hitting something that you wouldn't have hit otherwise, or it's you could hit it otherwise, but now you're getting into a better position, you're getting past them onto an objective and you're attacking and you're surviving future hits, things like that. You want to be using every part of this ability to make it be good, but there's a lot you can do with Tenya, and I think Tenya is really cool. I think this is an awesome inclusion in the game. Valentin Harvestblade. Vanquisher Primes are just kind of fine. Nobody really plays them that I've seen, but they're fine. This isn't a great fighter to add 5 points to, but that's totally fine. And the reason I kind of don't mind Valentin is because the ability is cool. One, it doesn't rely on being in faction, so almost all of these abilities require you to buff other Thunderstrike Stormcasts. Valentin doesn't care. He can just be an ally, and he can be a really cool ally. His ability turns X hits into crits, where X is the dice, but it's limited by your rolls and your own cowardice. You kind of have to make bets, right? So, for example, if you're going to get 2 attacks in with Valentin, you use your triple, and you have to bet how many hits you're going to do. So you could say, I've got triple fives here. The first one, I'm going to do bet 3, and then you hit 4 times. And you're like, all right, well, I wasted 1, but I still got 3 crits here. That's amazing. And then for the second one, you're going to bet 2, and then you only hit once. And then it's like, well, one of them got wasted, something like that. So you won't always get your, what are they, like fate dice or something, focus points. You won't always get your focus points to line up with your dice rolls. So you aren't getting quite as many hits into crits as you think you're getting when you buy the ability. But that's okay, because there's really interesting damage potential here. You can turn 4 hits into crits. That's perfectly acceptable. So let's say you roll this on 5s, you miss once, but you get 4 hits into crits. That gave you 8 damage. Plus, you can pay 205 for Valentin if you want, and you can give him +1 crit, and now those hits into crits are adding 3 damage per, and that's actually pretty interesting now. At that point, the math starts to add up in a pretty impactful way. So I think this is a big deal. I think that Valentin is a really good ally that you can play. Vanquisher Primes are not the craziest profile, so Valentin, when he's not using the ability, I'm not that excited about him. So you want him to be in a pretty low maintenance warband for him to really do his thing. But I think it's cool. I think anytime you start in combat and you just want to put out a ridiculous amount of damage to something that is toughness 4 or toughness 3, he's cool. My local meta is infested with clawbacks. Literally nothing in the game kills clawbacks for the points cost better than a +1 crit Valentin does. I mean, that is absurd. If you wanna do your perfect manic Warcry dream world situation, having a Valentin in your warband and getting him to fight a clawback is oh my god. So there's really cool stuff you can do with Valentin, and that's pretty awesome. Prentice Verna. By the numbers, it's totally fine. The Vindictor Prime is just a classic of Stormcast. Adding 5 points to it actually does kind of hurt as far as what you can put in your list, but that's totally fine. And Stormcast is kind of hard up for options at these lower points costs for leaders, and so it's nice to just have another option. The ability is a faction lock crits into hits bubble. We don't actually know, I assume that this takes precedence over, let's say the opponent has Valentin and they're turning hits into crits, and you have Prentice and you're turning crits into hits. We don't actually have word on which of those abilities takes precedent in order as far as I know, but I'm pretty sure it's Prentice. So I just said we don't know, but I'm pretty sure it's the defensive one, but don't listen to me, I suppose. Just prepare to, if your opponent feels competitive and really wants to win, prepare to spend some time looking this up if you're playing Vulcan Runeseekers or something like that. Otherwise, it's kind of interesting. It fixes this Stormcast weakness that I think a lot of people who are maybe not new to the game but have played, let's say, 10 times, think is Stormcast's weakness, which is that your opponent can always just roll crits. Anytime you're playing Stormcast, you can get surrounded by a bunch of witch elves, and if those witch elves roll a bunch of crits, you just die. Prentice Verna, you're not going to crit down those Stormcast, right? You're never going to get them that way. So that is kind of a classic Stormcast weakness that every once in a while you'll play them and you'll lose some fighters and you'll get frustrated, and she fixes that problem. The issue there is that in reality, once you've played a lot, that weakness isn't the weakness that loses you games with Stormcast. What loses you games is it's really hard to cover the board. It's really hard to put the right bodies in the right places. It's actually kind of hard to have enough offense to get your opponent down when you're slow and you don't have a lot of bodies. And so you can't just pinpoint one fighter and take it out very easily. And you also can't just spread a ton of damage around the board very easily. And so you have to kind of just walk this tightrope with those things, and you have to find ways to boost your damage output and your movement and things like that. she doesn't do that. So she's a bit of a trap, if we're being honest. I think you could definitely put Prentice into your Stormcast Eternals warband and thinking that you're covering a big weakness and you're going to win a bunch of games, and like that you would have lost otherwise, and actually end up losing more games than you were just doing whatever you were doing before. But she's still cool, and there are very specific matchups for Stormcast where you are worried about getting crit down, and she could help you with that. I do think she's more interesting in narrative play. I think she really turns around in narrative play. And the reason for that is that there's just a lot of fighters who will just like blow down just a ridiculous amount of damage all at once. And her really low damage can be fixed with, the battle trait that gives you, like the heroic trait that gives you +1 attack, stuff like that. All of a sudden, with 2-inch reach at 4.425, it's a little bit more palatable. And then being able to put that bubble out, once you've got like encampments, stuff like that, it's easier to have more Stormcast in your list. So you're not quite as limited by, the normal Stormcast weaknesses. And now you're really trying to just prevent your opponent from ending the game in one activation, which is so easy to do in narrative. And she kind of does that. So I actually think in narrative, she's pretty good. But in competitive, she's kind of there to be, she's kind of there to trick newer players, honestly, if we're being real here. But that's okay. She's a complex piece and she's a complex woman, and people will figure out how to play with her. Exactus Crane is the new Knight Arcanum. He's interesting. Knight Arcanums are pretty good. I think they're really solid because they have that amazing double. And then the strength 4 on the Wizard Blast, you can often find something that you're hitting on 4s or 3s. And then you have the double, so you can really just like lay siege to your opponent's like more protected pieces with a Knight Arcanum. I have had a ton of success running them in less not the most hyper competitive tournaments, but like just chill times, like narrative tournaments, or just like maybe less intense tournaments locally, things like that. Actually, my local tournaments tend to be more intense than when I travel to tournaments, but that's a separate thing. Either way, just adding 5 points to that is totally fine. And his special ability isn't faction locked, so you can use him as an ally totally easily. It's all pretty cool. The ability, now, I say this is a trap here on the slide. It's only a trap relative to how ridiculous the Bolt from the Heavens is, and he has access to Bolt from the Heavens, so Exactus Crane is just going to be able to like rain down bolts just the same way any normal Knight Arcanum is. And so the real trap is like you might make a double into a triple thinking that you want to use this ability, and then realizing that you would have actually been better off using Bolt from the Heavens, things like that. But the ceiling here is amazing. So until end of the battle round, each time an enemy fighter within 6 inches of this fighter is activated, you can roll a dice. On a 4-up, that fighter cannot use abilities. If you win initiative, and Exactus Crane for some reason is in the thick of things, like is in the middle of the battle, which shouldn't be the case, but sometimes you've been charged, you will be able to have a 50% chance at removing abilities. That's kind of tough because to spend a whole triple on something and have it only work half the time kind of hurts. But it might change the way your opponent plays, and that might be nice, right? Like your opponent might really not want to spend dice and fail. The issue is they can always just spend dice elsewhere in a lot of situations. It's going to be really hard to like construct a scenario where this really shuts an opponent down in that way. There are some things like, for example, like Dispossessed likes to just take control of an objective, and you can put Exactus Crane somewhere where they need to take that objective, and now there's a 50-50 shot that they just can't do it now. Things like that are possible with Exactus Crane. So there are scenarios, there are certain types of warbands that are out there in the meta that will hate to see something like this. But a lot of the time, remember, if your opponent has initiative, this does nothing, because they see you have a triple, they see you have Exactus, and they go, oh, well, I'll just use the fighter that is near Exactus, and then your triple does nothing, right? So that's kind of a tough situation to be in. But otherwise, I mean, Knight Arcanums are great. He's only 5 more points. And so 5 points to just like randomly gotcha someone is totally cool. I mean, that's not my thing, but like I'm smiling ear to ear right now because I know a lot of people who I really love playing the game with where that is their thing, and that makes me happy for them. And Exactus is it's perfectly that, right? It's like you take a very respectable fighter and then you just add 5 points to maybe live the dream once, and when you do it, that's awesome. My one issue with Exactus is that I think I like all 4 Knight Arcanum sculpts before him better than him. Other people are perfectly welcome to disagree. That's why we have an internet. Zhea Galdara. I think this is the only unique profile in the bunch. She is a Liberator Prime with Hammer and Shield, where unlike the normal Hammer and Shield, which has the same number of attacks as the double hammers, which I could have sworn was, it's so weird that that's the case. I think it's so dumb. Zhea has the profile that the Liberator Prime with Hammer and Shield is supposed to have, in my opinion, the one that it should have. But that one doesn't have that profile, so whatever. Either way, it's just -1 attack for -20 points, which is not a good deal if you go by like Divine Blessings math. But anytime, if you could remove stats to remove points in Divine Blessings, they would be way better, and they're already the best thing, right? And so you'd be pretty excited about that in a lot of situations. And a 2/4 attack profile, strength 4, is not an attack that you're like super excited about anyway. And so being able to get a much cheaper version is kind of nice. I actually, in some ways, kind of like Zhea better than the other Liberator Primes. You can argue either way. The ability, though, is, I think, super cool. It is faction locked, which is too bad, but it basically just lets you rampage onto enemy engaged heroes. So anytime their hero is fighting, or not even fighting, but within 3 inches of another friendly fighter, you can get a movement in within 1 inch and then get an attack in. You can also just get a free move as well and just not get the attack if it's not against a hero, or hilariously, if it's something with toughness 7, which is specifically just opposing Annihilator Primes with shields that aren't heroes already. So it's like one fighter in the game and enemy heroes. That's kind of silly, but either way, being able to get that move and attack in is really good. And it seems like it would be easy for an opponent to play around it, but it's really not, because 4-inch move, you can move, and then pop this triple and get an attack in. So you've gone 12 inches across the board and you're still getting an attack in. That's pretty impressive. You can do all of the crazy stuff that you do with Rampage with this, which is really awesome. And the fact that it's a 3-inch bubble on friendly fighters is pretty wild, given like you put a Vindictor on an objective, and now the entire objective can be used to trigger Zhea's crazy rampage if an opposing hero goes onto it, right? So that's all really cool. The only issue is that she kind of has low damage, right? I mean, 4/4/2/4 is not exactly the thing that you dream to rampage on, but that's fine. A lot of leaders aren't huge, giant, stompy things, especially it's kind of like becoming more of the rage to like theorize about swarm lists. I think we might see a lot more like fragile leader warbands in the future, and Zhea's just gonna chonk those down so quickly, right? You can still kind of do this if you have Zhea as an ally in a warband that is, say, running other Stormcast allies. Kind of hard to do, but like you could have Zhea and Calthea and Doraz as your 3 Stormcast in like a Caredron Overlord's force, where you've got like a bunch of really cheap Arcanauts to carry your bodies, and then you've got like the 3 fighters, and so there's 2 Thunderstrike Stormcasts that you can use to trigger Zhea's ability. You can do lots of cool stuff like that. And just anytime you're rampaging on a triple, those are good times, even if it's not the greatest rampager in the world. So I kind of like Zhea quite a bit. You can also use this to save a fighter, right? You can go, rampaging with Zhea on a fighter that's 3 inches away from something you really want to keep alive. And now Zhea is within 1 inch, so now they have to attack Zhea, and she's got that toughness 6, 25 wounds. So if you're protecting like one of your toughness 5, 20 wound little buddies who like has a treasure or something, that's really good. So I'm just kind of babbling about all these cool things you can do with Zhea, but it's sweet. And what I wanted to put this stupid box on the field for is the 175 points mark is really nice because it lets you run 7 fighters and have all 7 fighters be Stormcasts. You can have 3 Vindictors and 3 Liberators and Zhea, and that's just going to be a really flavorful, really cool warband. Also, just toughness 6 across the board, 7 fighters, just like, yeah, very cool. I actually think that this would win a lot of games depending on the meta. But yeah, I think this is a cool warband, and Zhea makes it all work, so that's pretty sweet. Zhea, I think, is my pick for like my absolute favorite of all of these fighters. I think she's amazing. I think there were others that were cool too, but Zhea is awesome. I just want to talk about them quickly as an exercise. The rules for running them together make it work, even though they all have the hero rune mark, but you really should not do this. The points don't really work together very well, and they all take triples. Every single one of them wants a triple, so you can't run them as a group, but that's okay in my opinion, because they're obviously optimized for booster pack sales. You should never, ever, ever, ever for any reason buy this whole box. Basically, it's terrible value. Well, actually, someone in my Discord pointed out that $9 per model for Stormcast actually isn't that bad if you buy the whole box, and that's fine. And the one rare one, man, I'm like talking myself out of my previous take, but the one rare one is Exactus Crane, and he's the one where I do kind of think Exactus is just worse than a Knight Arcanum. I mean, yeah, I kind of think he's worse than a Knight Arcanum anyway, and so you kind of don't mind if you miss out on Exactus and just get everybody else. So sure, if you really want all of them, you absolutely can buy the whole box, but I do think that they're really optimized for this like booster pack mentality of someone just buys one and gets like a random one, because they're all kind of interesting. I mean, some of them are really bad, but lots of them are cool, and some of them make really interesting allies. Like I think Valentin and what's her name, Zhea and Valentin and Tenya, I think all make like really interesting fighters to build around. So you can kind of feel comfortable just like buying a booster if you like gambling, and just like you have a coin flip chance to get a really cool fighter that you'll be really happy to own, just like even just for the rules, regardless of whether you like the sculpt. So that's pretty interesting. Obviously, if you hate Warhammer Heroes as a project, you should stay away. None of these fighters are going to become the cornerstones of competitive play. Even the good ones, like I think Tenya and Zhea are good, but I don't think they're going to become like massive meta pieces, right? Like I would play them with a straight face, but I wouldn't like worry about them going into a tournament, something like that. And so, you don't have to worry about these if you don't like the sales strategy that's going on. But if you don't mind, these are pretty sweet, and there's no harm in running them. So I think that that's kind of cool. This could have gone way worse is what I would say about that. It's pretty neat, and I will save any ranting about GW's sales practices for another video, because this is just to kind of give you your guide on the heroes. So I'm not going to talk about running them as a faction, other than to just say don't do it. But as allies, I hope I gave you some ideas while ranting about each individual fighter. And until the next crazy release for Warcry, may all your rolls be crits.